Okay, so my name's Zoe. So I'm going to do a little bit of justifying my existence here. So I am not a scientist per se. I have a degree in biology. It's actually zoology, but I always tell people biology because when I say zoology, they think that it means that I know how to shovel animal shit. It just means that I know a lot about animals compared to plants. Uh, so can I, is it still not working? Nearly there. All right. So 8 years ago, I wrote a book called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, The Science of Hedonism or the Hedonism of Science. People debate whether it should be hedonism or hedonism. I go with hedonism because it has the word head in it. So I spent 3 years writing this book. I read 300 scientific papers. I read about 80 books, and I interviewed about 70 scientists, including Celia, who is one of my favorites, even though it's still not working. Oh, dear God. Uh, So, all right. So I spent 3 years on this book looking at the evolutionary roots of why. There we go. Awesome. Right. So I spent 3 years on my book. However, prior to that, I grew up in the music industry. So a lot of people at this conference maybe have been involved in psychedelic research for like 2 years, three. I've been writing about psychedelics professionally for 12 years. But prior to that, I grew up in the music industry, and my dad is a rather curious rock promoter in Toronto. So I grew up in a hurricane of cocaine idiots nonsense. So, as they say, so I've been writing about psychedelics professionally for 12 years. However, I have been in this field since the day I was born. So I don't think anyone in this room can say that they have worked in the field of drugs addiction and the human brain for 40 years. But I can. So a picture is 1,000 words. That is actually me at the age of 6 months old. Some people put their kids in sunflower costumes. My parents did that. So, ketamine. Let's talk about ketamine because everybody at this conference has talked about it as a miracle cure. Okay, who here? Okay, let's do a show of hands. All right. Who has seen any of their friends destroyed by ketamine? Okay, there you go. Right? Who here has not? Vast minority, right? So it is such an unspoken fucking disaster in the making. What's going to happen? I think that ketamine is going to be the next Oxycontin, and I'll tell you why. So, I have written for Wired, I've written for Vice, Scientific American. I am the only person in the world who can say Rolling Stone magazine paid me to take acid. Absolutely true. This is a cover story I wrote for an American magazine called The Nation. Now, a lot of British people don't know The Nation. It's 150 years old. It's unflinchingly left wing. And Hunter S. Thompson wrote for it. Martin Luther King wrote for it. I wrote an 8,000 word piece about the dangers that psychedelic money poses to the psychedelic renaissance. And everybody here who cares about the psychedelic renaissance, we all know it's very fragile, right? We all know that there's anything that could break it. All we need is like one dead kid, right? One poster child. And I think the greatest danger to the psychedelic renaissance is the ketamine clinics. So, ketamine, very, it's known by many names. Special K, as in the cereal, banker's lunch, because it only takes 15 minutes. So Celia reminded me, it used to be known as kitty smack in the traveler communities because kids would get into ketamine when they were like 12, and then they would get into heroin when they were like 18. Regretamine is my favorite nickname. And the Marmite of drugs. So for any Americans in the audience, Marmite is a horrible British thing. It's known, you love it or you hate it, which is a good strapline. I think my favorite joke about how one can hate ketamine. So one of my best friends is a lesbian who lives in Brighton. And Brighton, as anybody here knows, hotbed, it was always full of ketamine. So she said to me, brilliant. So this is I think this is actually I think my favorite joke about ketamine. My friend Janet said, ketamine to me is like the penis. All my friends liked it. It was always around. So I tried and I tried and I tried. Don't, don't like it. Some people hate it, but some people love it. And there is no drug that has destroyed my friends more than ketamine. However, in America, it's being lauded as a miracle cure. Here we go. New York Times, I was paralyzed by severe depression. Then came ketamine. It's not a club drug. Ketamine clinic. There you go. Yeah. Ketamine clinic in River North uses drug to treat depression. No. I call it the heroin of my generation. And I think a lot of people here would throw up their hands and say, there's no drug that has destroyed my friends more than cocaine, more than heroin, more than alcohol. Ketamine destroyed so many of the most beautiful and the most brilliant people that I know. I have two female friends who got ulcerative cystitis, right? A bag of fluid in between their vagina and their urethra that had to be surgically removed. One of my girlfriends lost every tooth from there to there, and she was 26. 26. And two of my male friends have destroyed their prostates, right? One of them can't get it up. Can you imagine what it feels like to know that you're going to spend the rest of your life without the ability to get an erection because of an addiction? Okay. I think ketamine is going to be the next Oxycontin. I really believe this. So, who here remembers squat raves? Right? You couldn't go anywhere where there wasn't piles of ketamine everywhere. Who here remembers when it was 5 pounds a gram? Yeah? Okay, so in Brighton, it was 5 pounds a gram for ketamine. That's less than a pint of beer. I have friends who could do a line literally that big, go to the shop, buy a newspaper, have a cup of tea. Ketamine has an enormous tolerance profile, which means you need more and more and more to get the same effect. So it also has terrible effects on the urogenital system. As one of my friends put it, everybody in Bristol has to sit on a plastic donut, meaning that they had destroyed their rectum. It was super fun. So one of my girlfriend, So one of my girlfriends who had ulcerative cystitis, the bag of fluid, they originally thought it was between her anus and her vagina. So they went in the wrong way and they realized they'd made a mistake. So they had to go in the other way. And as she put it, I've had so many doctors' fingers in my arse. It's getting boring. So, okay, look, it does have useful properties. Okay. So ketamine is very, very useful. So it's the only anesthetic where you don't need an external oxygen supply and you don't need electricity, which means that you can use it in the battlefield. So it first became popularized in the Vietnam War, and it was very, very useful. You didn't have to bring somebody back to the hospital to have a GA, right? So it is actually listed on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. It is an incredibly important drug, okay? So I'm not saying that ketamine is entirely bad, okay? Every drug is a double-edged sword. However, this is the problem with ketamine. What's the molecule there that is not normal? What's the element? Chlorine, right. So most drugs contain only carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, right? This contains chlorine. There's only one other drug that contains chlorine, and that is angel dust, PCP. There's a reason why it's there, and that's what makes it weird. It also is why it burns, right? So if you do a big line of K, you know how it absolutely really, really hurts? That's why. It's basically bleach. Now, as I said, it is an unparalleled anesthetic, okay? I had intravenous ketamine when I was 17 years old to have some wisdom teeth removed. Okay. And it was amazing. It was absolutely fucking magnificent. Okay. I listened to Belle and Sebastian. I remembered everything. I felt no pain. It was awesome. 5 years later, I had to have other wisdom teeth removed without ketamine, and it was horrible. I could hear the bone cracking. Awful. Ketamine has a time and a place, and that place is anesthesia, not the treatment of depression, in my opinion. And I'll get into why. So, yes, it does have an antidepressant effect. This is what everyone's talking about. Yes, it does produce a very, very rapid relief of your depression symptoms within about like 2 hours. However, that antidepressant effect doesn't last very long. And that's the problem. They're not telling people, all of the K clinics are not telling people that it only lasts up to 5 to 7 days, maybe 30 at the most. So these are clinics run by Field Trip. So it's a Canadian company. As soon as I saw this, so imagine that you've been depressed. Okay, imagine you have suffered from absolutely catastrophic depression for like maybe 20 years. You go to a place that looks like this, right? Plush padding, lovely, lovely furnishing, soft lighting. You go into a lovely little den. Compare that to the squat raves that we went to, right? As soon as I saw this photo of the CEOs, it's like, ugh. As, as soon as I saw that photo, I was like, oh God, I bet they're from fucking Toronto. And they are from Toronto, and now they're bankrupt, and I am not unhappy that they're bankrupt. I could just look at this photo and know, yep, they're just in it for the money. Just jeans, brick background. Knew it. Here we go. $4,500 for 10 sessions. Here we go. Celia gave me permission to be a bit mean. Awaken. No. You can laugh. That's the point. All right. So Awaken, the UK's favorite clinic, which is based in Bristol. Who here remembers when Bristol was the K capital of the UK, right? Right. Okay. So you're setting up a clinic where you're charging people £7,000 for ketamine therapy. How long is it going to take anybody to realize, wait a minute, I can just spend 20 quid on ketamine just around the corner? So, as I said, it's extremely toxic to the bladder. It causes ulcerative cystitis, has a huge tolerance profile, and it's profoundly addictive. Now, I don't suffer from clinical depression, but okay, so when I had ketamine, when I had my wisdoms taken out, it was the most beautiful, blissful, worry-free, incredible experience. If I had been depressed for 20 years and then I felt that way and then it went away, there's no way I would only do it once. And there's no way I would pay 7 grand again. This is a recipe for addiction. Again, chlorine. So this is one of my biggest beefs with ketamine, okay? It's not a psychedelic, okay? It's a dissociative. It doesn't interact with the serotonin system. It interacts with glutamate, okay? It's an entirely different neurochemical system. It doesn't even, I don't want to be rude. It's not a psychedelic, okay? It's a dissociative. And I'm tired of people calling it a psychedelic because it's not. So, okay, let's go through some history. This isn't even new, okay? So here's a review paper from 2007 about ketamine-induced ulcerative cystitis, 2007. Urinary tract disease, 2008. British Medical Journal. Note, they're based in Bristol. Ketamine-associated ulcerative cystitis, case report, Malaysia, 2010. This is my favorite, I think, title of an academic paper ever. A murderer of young bladders. A murderer of young bladders. So as Celia said, the problem, we are still seeing bladder problems in the UK. I've seen 16-year-olds who are now infertile and wearing colostomy bags for the rest of their lives because of ketamine. Can you imagine having a colostomy bag before you're old enough to vote? They had sex. We saw a woman who had used 20 grams of ketamine daily for 20 grams a day for 8 years. Just take that in. So Adam Winstock is one of my favorite psychiatrists. He runs the Global Drug Survey. So he told me that there's two very interesting subpopulations of people who get addicted to ketamine. One is women who were sexually abused as children, which kind of makes sense because you have something that is so painful and you can't even talk to people about it. You want something that divorces yourself from space and time, right? The other interesting subpopulation is teenagers in Hong Kong, because there's a lot of teenagers in Hong Kong who have rich businessmen for dads, imported China brides. They grew up in a household with no love. It's all about academic achievement, all about, right? There's zero affection. And they grow up in these tiny matchbox apartments like that with like no love in their life. So all they want to do is just escape. And that kind of makes sense, right? But the Americans are ignoring this, right? So So to rectify the problem, so basically we had a huge population in the UK of people who were doing K excessively to numb the pain. And then there were doctors and scientists and medicaments who didn't understand that it had an addictive potential and it had problems. So there were two populations of people who were very interested in K, but they didn't talk to each other. So Celia Morgan set up something called K Day, which I think we can all agree should have been called K Pride. Not my joke, one of my friends. So she decided to set up basically a street fair of different stalls. So people who were talking about mindfulness and meditation, addiction treatment, K cramps and you. They had something called Creativity Corner, both starting with K. And she held it, and I cannot possibly give her enough kudos. She did it in Covent Garden. Covent Garden, My Fair Lady, the flower stalls. That's where Celia Morgan had a whole bunch of K-heads interact with a whole bunch of scientists. So the first time that Celia told me about this was 11 years ago, and I could not stop laughing. And I said, so tell me, did it get out of hand? And she said, the lineups for the loos were very long. Unfortunately, there is an explosion in K clinics in America and Canada. And Celia has dealt with people who are in charge of these clinics who refuse to believe that ketamine addiction even exists. The definition of mansplaining, I would say, is those dudes telling Celia, who is the global expert on ketamine addiction, that ketamine addiction doesn't exist. She's dealt with teenagers who have colostomy bags and then spoken to dudes in Vancouver and San Francisco who say, oh no, ketamine addiction's not a thing. Mm-hmm. Why is it that the Americans are ignoring the history of ketamine addiction around the world? And I would say two words, American myopia. Now, there will be some Americans in the audience. Please don't take offense. I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but I'm the least patriotic Canadian ever. My last book will be called Canada's Greatest Crimes. We can talk about it later. But we can all agree Americans have a problem in that they don't pay attention to what's happened in other countries around the world. So, for example, healthcare, right? Obama tried to bring in normal public healthcare. People called it death panels, people screaming in like town hall meetings, right? You know, Americans say, greatest country in the world. And you go, what about your literacy rate? You're 17th. Greatest country in the world. Okay, what about your maternal mortality? You're 21st. Okay, so if Americans paid attention to what happened in other countries, they would see that there was an addiction outbreak in Taiwan and Hong Kong in the year 1999. We had addiction outbreaks of ketamine from the year 2002, I would say. I think my very first experience watching somebody who was doing too much K was Glastonbury, 2003. Stone Circle, if you've been there, it's like the drugs Wall Street. There was this woman like just chatting at the air, like just chatting nonsense. And one of my friends said, "Darling, have you been taking ketamine all night?" And she said, "I hope so." So, if you know anything about the Yanks, they love pills. They love pharmaceuticals. It's their favorite thing. One of my You're laughing because you know it's true. One of my friends was in a hostel in Berlin, and he was hanging out with this guy, and he said, "Should we get some gear?" Meaning, like, you know, should we like order in some things? And the guy pulled out some Xanax, and he goes, "Oh, bloody Americans! Don't do drugs that come in a box." There we go. I got my playfulness back. I always say, if you want to understand America, spend half an hour watching pharmaceutical ads. Psychedelic medicine is here. Am I a candidate? Okay, so this is I think the scariest thing is mail order ketamine. This is amazing. Ketamine. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's real. Here we go. Mail order ketamine. So field trip. Send you ketamine to take at home, and then you can talk to your phone. You don't even get a real therapist. You talk to your phone. What could go wrong? I mean, basically, taking ketamine and talking to your phone is what loads of my friends did in squats for years. Here we go. Mind bloom. Ketamine therapy from the comfort and safety of your own home. My ketamine home, redefining the meaning of happiness. Same girl, right? Because who needs a new web department? Fast acting, no. Under $50, no. 2,750, no. This is a company called Peak. Do you offer therapy? No, Peak's providers are not therapists. Great. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So the problem is that, especially in America, there's no central regulatory body, right? So you can go to multiple clinics and nobody's monitoring it. Nobody is keeping track. And if you want to, if you have the money, you can go to a different clinic every single day. So there's a case study. This guy, Mr. A, he went to 11 different clinics across 5 state lines every single week. He eventually died in a car accident. He was prescribed ketamine to do every 4 hours as needed for depression. That's a great idea. Uh-huh, right? So again, as I said, the biggest danger is that the antidepressant effect is not long lasting. So here we go. Ketamine and Depression Narrative Review, 2019. It goes away after 1 to 2 weeks after infusion. Another one? After day 5. As I said, it's a very, very important anesthetic. Okay. It's really, really crucial for that use. But if you have that awesome feeling and you've been depressed, there's no way you're not going to want to do it again. So here's a little anecdote. So I broke my leg in 2015. And so I had a spiral fracture, and they did surgery and they put a bit of metal in my leg. So in the recovery ward, so they told me before the surgery, they said, we're going to give you Oxycontin. And then after the surgery, they said, we've changed our mind. I was like, excuse me? No, we think you're fine with paracetamol. I was like, no, you just put a piece of metal in my leg. I'm not going home. until you give me Oxycontin. They're like, fine. So they gave me some pills. So my mom drove me home. I got into my flat, 2 flights of stairs, got into my bed. I was full of morphine, just had surgery. I was like, oh God, thank God. I can now just go to sleep. And then my phone rings. Hey, Zoe, it's the hospital. Uh-huh. We gave you too much Oxycontin. Sucks to be you. No, you don't understand. We're coming to get it. What? So they gave me 21 pills. They wanted to only give me 14. They sent a guy in a taxi to my house. I had to crawl down the stairs with a broken leg on morphine to give the guy back 7 pills of Oxy because the Brits are terrified of a replication of the American opioid crisis, right? That's how they were terrified that it would induce an addiction in me. That's what happened here in the UK. In America, they are flying blind. They are refusing to see the history of ketamine addiction in other countries. So, as the saying goes, he who does not know their history is condemned to repeat it. So, let's go back 200 years, right? Heroin was marketed as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. Turned out to be anything but. Very difficult to get heroin in a hospital, effortless on the street. Same. This is my favorite medicament that existed in the 1800s, morphine-laced syrup for children. I think every parent here would say, God, that sounds awesome. Here we go. Barbiturates, they also said, non-addictive. That's what killed Marilyn Monroe. Benzos, Valium, also sold as non-addictive. And of course, Oxycontin sold as non-addictive. Again and again and again, we're being sold painkillers that are non-addictive. And if you want to go through the history of Oxy, it is both depressing and hilarious. Oxycontin swing records, Oxycontin merchandise, Oxycontin gorillas for some reason, Oxycontin plush toys. So the opioid crisis is no joke. Okay, so the Americans are taking it seriously, and the Brits are terrified of it happening here, which they should be. But as Rupert McShane, who is one of the pioneers of looking at ketamine to treat alcohol use disorder, every single potent psychiatric physical intervention that has ever been invented, ECT, antidepressants, opiates, benzos, has been overused, invariably resulting in backlash and then stigma. So what I find most fascinating about the way that the Americans are refusing to look at the history of ketamine addiction is that the very first ketamine addict, basically, that we know of is this scientist, John Lilly. Who here has heard of John Lilly? Okay, so John Lilly is most famous for this experiment. So he was convinced that we could learn how to talk to dolphins. So he got, I'm sure you all know this story. So he built a house in the Bahamas and he got a young woman who was his PhD student to see if she could talk to the dolphin. They had gave him a hand job. I mean, let's go there. That's what he's most famous for. Okay. But what's less well known is that John Lilly is basically the world's first ketamine addict. So he got addicted to doing ketamine in isolation tanks. So he would have his personal assistant give him infusions of K for hours and hours and hours, and he would talk to dolphins in his head. So I made the mistake of buying his last book, which is this book, A Peeping Tom at the Keyhole of Eternity. It makes no sense. If you would read it and tell me what the hell it means, I would be grateful. That's him doing shit tons of K. So Rick Doblin, who'll be speaking later, he told me that he looked like a heroin addict. He was just covered in track marks just from doing K. And he was an American, and he was the first K addict. So why are the Americans ignoring this? So I very much believe that ketamine is going to be the source of the next addiction epidemic in America. Absolutely. You know what? I'm not a gambler. If you want to bet me $1,000, I'll take that bet. I also think that ketamine has the risk of bringing down the psychedelic renaissance. And All it's going to take is one kid. Okay. One last point. Okay. So say you are a concerned parent. Say you have a child who's, I don't know, 19, 20, brilliant, beautiful, ready for college, and they're depressed, and you've read about ketamine therapy, and you send your kid for ketamine therapy, and it costs a fortune. And your very smart kid then realizes they can get it on the dark web. And say that kid then does what 4 people in this country, it's recorded, drowned in the bath. Okay, so there's 4 recorded cases of people who took a line of K and then had a bath. Seems like a very innocuous activity, like having a spliff, having a glass of wine, and they drowned. So if that happens, and we have 2 vengeful parents, a lawyer and a doctor, that's all it's going to take to shut down not just the ketamine industry, but the entire psychedelic renaissance. And I'm genuinely scared that that's going to happen. So I'm not saying ketamine doesn't have any uses, but we need to have more caution.